Hi, I'm Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost. And as a cop, you've got one of the toughest jobs in the world, and often one of the most thankless jobs. But it's also one of the most important jobs in the world. No matter what you hear in way of criticism and commentary out there, the fact of the matter is the people in our communities count on you. When they pick up the phone and dial 911, they're not expecting to get a psychologist or a politician or a social worker to come up and take care of the violence that's happening in their lives. That's why it's important for you to get the training to be able to handle these situations, the best-in-class tools to be able to do one of the toughest jobs on earth. Just as important, your presence on the job contributes to public safety. It deters criminal activities. It makes everybody in our communities feel safer, for them, for their families, for their children. Your job is indispensable to our way of life. So we have undertaken a top-to-bottom review at the Ohio Peace Officers Training Academy. We're going to make some changes. And what you'll see shortly is a series of short videos explaining what we're doing and launching the new OPOTA. First, we're going to be focused on officer safety, proven techniques, what works, and it's going to be delivered by proven, experienced experts. Secondly, we're going to have a component for online training that's going to deliver new content. The days of the old homemade videos with the lousy lighting and the horrible audio are gone. We're not going there anymore. Thirdly, we're going to deliver in-person training at geographic locations around the state so that you don't have to come all the way down to London, Ohio to get trained. We're still doing things at London. We're going to do the things that require the physical facilities. For example, firearms training, defensive driving. But most of the training is going to be closer to home so that you can go home at night to be with your family and that you're not so far out of the jurisdiction and it's not quite so costly to train. We're doing our part. And we need you to do yours as well. Work with us. We appreciate the input that we've gotten from so many of you. As we roll this training out, take advantage of it and give us your input. You know, at the Ohio Attorney General's office, we've got a saying, do big good. You do big good every day of your life. These trainings, the work we're doing at OPOTA, together we can do bigger good.
I'm Holly Hollingsworth, Chief Communications Officer at the Ohio Attorney General's Office. For OPOTA to provide law enforcement training based on what's proven to work, you gotta go find the proof. I recently caught up with Dr. Robin Engel at the University of Cincinnati, a professor, a researcher, and one of the few who's actually gathering real evidence about what really works. She provided her thoughts about the changes at OPOTA and shared her personal story that drives her work.
Hi, I'm Dr. Robin Engel at the University of Cincinnati, and I used to serve as the Vice President for Safety and Reform at the University of Cincinnati after we had an officer-involved shooting in 2015. And I had the opportunity to come in and help an agency move forward with changes in policies and practices. But my story really starts well before then. For over 2 decades, I've been working with law enforcement agencies from around the country. And my goal has always been to help agencies reduce harm, because that's what you do out there on a daily basis. Police officers all across the state of Ohio are reducing harm in our communities and reducing harm for one another too, because keeping officers safe is just as important. But my story starts long before. And in fact, my first interaction with a police officer was at my home when I was a little girl in the late 1970s. And I lived in a household that was low income and somewhat troubled with an alcoholic father. So the police were routinely called to my home. And the outcome was always the same, which was not much of a change. But one time an officer came, and an officer made a decision that that day my father would be arrested. And a few days after that, my father came back home. And after that, my father didn't drink anymore, and he wasn't abusive anymore. And it changed my life. Now, I've always wondered, what was it about that officer that made that decision that day? Because what was happening in practices across the country then was arrests were not being made. And it wouldn't be another decade until we learned through studies that arrest was probably the best outcome that could happen to reduce violence for women and children. And so officers weren't trained to do that until much later. But that officer made a decision that day that changed my life in a very good and positive way. And so what I wanted to better understand was, how are officers making decisions, and what's the evidence base, and how are they trained? So I've dedicated my professional life to helping officers make the best decisions they can through that type of training and evidence, because we know the power of the police to intervene in people's lives on behalf of the state, to literally take their liberty, is the most awesome power that we give. And that should be based on the best evidence that we have available for what works in policing. The goal of policing, as I said, is to reduce harm in communities, and make those police-citizen encounters safer. The very best way to do that is to follow the evidence and to train what works. Now, it may surprise you to learn that most police training is not based on evidence. There are very few robust studies that examine the outcomes of police-citizen interactions to help guide us for what are the best choices. And I was really struck by that when I took over as a Vice President of Safety and Reform, because suddenly I was in a position where I needed to change the policies and the training for my police officers and to make sure I was keeping them safe. So I looked to the body of evidence to guide me, and I was really surprised at how little evidence there was. And that's why, since that time, I've spent the last 5 years helping to build that evidence base. And I'm not the only one. There are researchers around the country that are examining best practices for training and for officer interactions with citizens. And people are calling for police reforms right now. And I know that is a challenging issue for police officers. But if you think about police reform as an opportunity for continuous professional improvement, because that's really what it is, and to continue to improve those best practices with the best training available, that's what we're trying to do. And that's why I'm so excited about what's happening at OPOTA right now. Because OPOTA is making a lot of changes. And our research team is helping to build the evidence that they'll be using right there in the classrooms and in our virtual training that'll be going out across the state. Let me give you some examples of some of the evidence that we're building. For example, we're just finishing up a study with the NYPD right now to look at the impact of their implicit bias training. We have also been looking at the impact of officer resiliency training, officer safety and wellness. What are we doing in those areas that are having the best impact for our police officers? We're also creating new training right now, working with some federal agencies to develop training for police encounters with people with behavioral issues, behavioral and mental health issues, but also intellectual and developmental disabilities. The one training that I want to talk to you about today is de-escalation training. Now, de-escalation training has there's been a lot of myths told about de-escalation training. Some people are concerned that maybe time, distance, and cover actually reduces officer safety and increases their risk of injury. So we wanted to test whether or not that was actually the case. And working with the Louisville Metro Police Department, we were able to systematically test their de-escalation training. We randomly controlled which officers received that training, and then we looked to see what the outcome was. And what we found was a reduction in officers' use of force, but more importantly, a 20 to 30% reduction in officer injury and citizen injury. We are literally making these encounters safer through the use of de-escalation training. As we continue to develop this body of evidence, we're going to be bringing this right back to our police trainers here in Ohio, working with OPOTA. What's new at OPOTA, you might wonder? Well, officer safety focused specifically on evidence and delivered by proven, experienced instructors. We're also, of course, with COVID, has forced us into opportunities, and I'm going to call them opportunities and not challenges, opportunities to deliver online curriculum. That online curriculum, we need to make sure it's functional, and there's a commitment to an interactive and accessibility for officers that might not have otherwise been able to get that training. And we're also going to be using experts that are contracted to go outside of our academy and around the state to bring that training directly to you. So a lot of new things are happening at OPOTA, but the most important thing is that a lot of this training is going to now be based on evidence that we're pulling together about what works to reduce harm in communities and to keep police officers safe. We want to lessen the times when officers, rookie officers, come back from an academy and they're told by the veteran officers, forget everything you learned in the academy. We want to reduce the number of times that officers go to in-service training and come back feeling like it wasn't valuable for them. How do we do that? Well, first, I'll ask you, if you're one of those officers who believes that training doesn't matter, I want you to ask yourself, why is that? And if you're one of the supervisors out there that's not reinforcing the importance of evidence-based training with your subordinates, I want you to ask, why is that? Because we know that every day there's an opportunity for police officers around the state of Ohio to make decisions that will significantly impact someone's life, and maybe even your own life. And wouldn't you want those decisions to be based on the best training available, training that's based on evidence about what works and what those best outcomes can be? So you may never know the impact that you've had on someone else's life. Just like the officer that came to my house back in the late 1970s has no idea that the decision he made that day that was different than the decisions that had been made before, that decision had a significant positive impact on my life. You have the opportunity to change someone's life for the positive. In order to give you the tools to do that, we need to test practices, test that training, and make sure that we're giving you things that are based on evidence. We're going to be committed, just as you are, to increase effectiveness, efficiency, and equity in all of the decisions that you're making in your communities. And as you continue to serve your communities every day, I'm going to continue to be doing my work to build that evidence, to help you make sure that the encounters you have with citizens are safer for the citizen and for the officers and your fellow officers. So I'm looking really forward to all the changes that are happening at OPOTA, and I hope that you are too. We have a new commitment. We know that best practices are continually evolving. We know that the change is going to be generated by the evidence that we learn. So I'd like you to use your experiences and your knowledge within your agency and encourage your commanders to test the impact of the changes in the training. You have an opportunity to build best practice. It's going to be a continual effort. We can all be in this together. So I'm excited about the possibilities for continual improvement in policing, and I hope that you are too. Thank you so much for your continued commitment to our communities. It's so very important. Stay safe out there.
Hi, I'm Chief Charles Chandler of the Westerville Division of Police. Like police chiefs across Ohio, I want to do everything I can to ensure that my officers get the best training available. So I'm pleased about the redesign happening at OPOTA. At many training conferences I've attended over the years, I've heard in-person presentations from the person you'll meet in a moment, Lexipol co-founder Gordon Graham. The room was packed every time. He offers great insight about the importance of training, and he points out that good training helps you on the job every day. Like me, he sees good things in the changes at OPOTA. Let's hear a few words now from Gordon Graham, himself a 33-year veteran of the California Highway Patrol.
Hello, Gordon Graham here, and I was asked to give you some thoughts on the importance of training. So let's start with this. 47 years ago, 1973, I was a brand new California Highway Patrol officer and our training academy was in Sacramento. This was my initial training. Most of the movies we watched in the CHP Academy were from where? The Ohio State Highway Patrol. I kid you not. I was impressed with Ohio way back then, although I had never even visited your state. 20 years later, I'm on the lecture circuit, and I visited Ohio quite a bit 20 years later. And today, I still make visits to Ohio. I am impressed with what you're doing, and I know the commitment that your state has made to improving the quality of training, not just in person, but online training. I think your state's pretty squared away. But let me give you my thoughts on training. All too often in my live lectures, I hear this. Oh, it's the state's responsibility. It's the county's responsibility. It's my city's responsibility to make sure I'm fully and adequately trained. Oh, it's the chief's responsibility. Oh, it's the training officer's responsibility. Oh, it's my supervisor's responsibility. Yes, everybody has responsibility, but it gets down to you. You are responsible to make sure you are fully and adequately trained to properly perform your rightful work. Now, I hear all these numbers. 350 million contacts made by law enforcement personnel around America last year. I don't know how they came up with it, but I can believe that's a true number. And the vast majority of the things that the women and men of American law enforcement do, including Ohio, you're doing them right. Rarely do we make mistakes. But when we do get in trouble, you can narrow it down to about 10 things in every job description. In a long lecture, I call these the core critical tasks. Very risky, done very rarely, with no time to think. So when I say make every day a training day, I am asking you to take a look at the job you do in Ohio law enforcement and ask yourself, in this job, what are the things that fall into this category of core critical tasks? Most of what you do day in and day out, you've done before. And when you have past experience, that's an excellent, excellent tool for you to use. But when you get involved in a low-frequency task, something you have not seen often or have not seen ever, a low-frequency task that's high risk in nature, there's two types of them, time to think and no time to think. On the ones that give you time to think, please use that time. But there are about a dozen of what I call the core critical tasks. Very risky, done very rarely, with no time to think. These are the ones that you as a professional need to focus on and make every day a training day. Now, you can get this information from the newspaper. You can read the various police websites out there and the stories that are going on, but it's your responsibility to make sure that you are fully and adequately trained to do your rightful work. Anyhow, I want to thank you in advance for everything you're doing. I wish you good luck, good health, goodbye, and please work safely.